career and health may not be areas that jump to front of mind when one thinks about ESG. But frankly, you can't deliver on any net zero commitments if you don't bring your people along, if you don't have the right people, and if they're not compensated appropriately. So nothing is actually going to work unless you're bringing the career aspect in. And then on the health side, again, you want to have a thriving workforce. You need to think about their health, both mentally and physically.
Hello, welcome to Sustainability Voices, the podcast dedicated to exploring the impactful stories behind the voices driving sustainable change. I'm Patrick Obeid, founder of a climate tech startup and your host for this series. In today's episode, we will explore the importance of investing in your employees with Cara Williams from Mercer. Stay tuned as we uncover various facets of sustainability, voice by voice.
Today, we're delighted to welcome Cara Williams, the Global Head of ESG, Climate and Sustainability at Mercer. In this episode, we'll explore how social dimensions, particularly diversity and inclusion, and health and career initiatives are integrated into corporate strategies. Cara, it's so wonderful to have you. I'm really excited to learn from you today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited and I can't wait to have our chat.
Absolutely. Let's dive right in. First question, we hear about the S in ESG a lot. However, S is really broad. So I'm really curious to hear from you if you can start by defining what the S in ESG covers and why it's pivotal for sustainability strategies for your clients at Mercer.
Sure. You're absolutely right. S is very broad, but as is E and is G. And I think the whole point of using an acronym is really to even provide a framework for what is an incredibly broad area concerning so many different aspects. So obviously within S, it could contain how organizations are with their own people, how they actually interact with communities, the impact that they have on communities, the use of human slavery. There's trafficking and supply chain. Basically, the S is anything that pertains to people in some form or fashion. But as you can imagine, that really does. It is in such a huge area for a focus that one really does have to narrow down as an organization as to what aspects of the S one is going to focus on, because you can't tackle them all.
Absolutely. This is really interesting, Cara. And actually, one question that just came to mind is, S is really broad, as you just stated, and every sector, every company are different. And for every sector and every company, the different dimensions or metrics within S that actually are material or actually matter to that business are different. I would love to hear about how you at Mercer were able to identify the relevant metrics that are the most material within S.
We have one great benefit is the fact that we are the world's largest HR consultant, and by virtue of being that, we obviously end up having a great deal of data, and when we work with clients, we are very much data and numbers based in our approach. So much less sort of anecdotal and much more focused on what are the numbers actually genuinely saying within the organizations we work with, and then also is how do they benchmark? How do they look compared to other organizations? So when doing measuring, there are lots of different aspects that one can obviously tackle, and the fact that there's new regulation coming for starting next year with the CSRD in Europe in particular, which now includes people, if you will, and reporting on people and data around that is now going to be required, which is great, really, because that's exactly what you need, right? You have to have, unfortunately, regulation typically will spur on the behaviors that one needs, certainly as an investor or as an employee, or to work for or invest in any of these organizations. You need to have that transparency. So regulation helps bring about a lot of that transparency. So I think a data-driven approach is a clearly important one. I think especially when you're dealing with a lot of sort of hearsay and speculation as to the impact of you mentioned DEI, the impact of DEI on an organization, it's a lot easier and it speaks a lot louder when you can actually pinpoint the difference in performance, in overall efficiencies, and in corporate retention of employees, engagement with customers. If you have numbers around those things, you're going to do a lot better in trying to make sure that DEI isn't a critical component in a corporate strategy.
I love hearing that, Kira, and I can't wait to dig into DNI and what it means for you at Mercer and for your clients as well. Perhaps just one more question that I have in mind. As you know, we work and you work with a lot of global companies, and many of our companies have presence in multiple countries across multiple continents. And sometimes some of the challenges that I hear the most from some of those companies is that how do you normalize and harmonize DNI data? Because sometimes the same data may mean different things in Germany versus Sweden, versus Chicago in the USA. So curious to hear from you if you have any best practices or any guidance for enterprises today that are getting started on that journey. How do I harmonize and normalize my data for it to be comparing apples to apples across different countries and different continents within the same company?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the most sort of blatant sort of frustrations and limitations. The implication of harmonizing the numbers is a very difficult one, right? I think the only thing that is probably easy, sort of, in quotations, would be to start with gender balance, right? And I think that's why you see a lot more of that, where organizations kind of say, we're going to park any other diversity for now. What we can do easily is gender, right? And looking at things like pay gaps, and looking at internal labor maps, and looking at promotion rates and things like that across the gender spectrum is just an easier thing to tackle. Once you are dealing with a global organization, frankly, diversity just means very different things depending on where you operate, and having specific models that are appropriate for each market that you operate in is going to be actually still very, very important if you're going to pay attention to anything that goes beyond gender, which absolutely is critical as well. If you're going to be focused on diversity, it does go beyond gender diversity. You need to start to incorporate other other factors that may be in play. And again, region to region, market to market, that can be very, very different, and you're looking at very different criteria. But you surely can benchmark within your market against other companies. It's just not. I wouldn't recommend doing that globally outside of the gender lens.
This is really, really powerful context, Cara. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Would love to zoom in and understand a bit more Mercer's approach to DNI. Perhaps, one set of questions that I have is around what are some of the initiatives that you've undertaken at Mercer? How have they been developed, and how do you measure success as well?
Yeah, so one thing about DEI, and again, I think it's another acronym that in certain markets is considered a little bit more acrimonious. There's been changes in certain legislation that have made certain organizations shy away from DEI. For me, what I really try to think about when it comes to diversity is it's we work with corporations, right? So it's about working with employers in particular, when we're talking about sort of the diversity as far as DEI consulting goes. So I think the important thing as an organization is to really know your people, right? And I think we've spent many years just running on an assumption that our entire employee base is basically the same. And as we know, that is absolutely not the case. People have very different backgrounds, different stories, different things that are happening. That said, there are ways to group the employees that you have around a whole bunch of factors that go beyond sort of your standard check the box types of things. It's looking at different aspects of your employees, whether or not they were married, how long they've been married, if they've had children, where they reside, potential exposure to certain types of health implications. So diversity is really actually offers an employer a pretty important and powerful tool to get to understand their people better and understand how best to provide them either benefits that are best suited to them, or to provide, retirement options that are truly going to help these people to reach their future retirement aspirations, right? So just saying that everybody retiring at a certain year is going to suffice is just, it just doesn't work for, for the vast majority of folks. You need to look at people's backgrounds. You need to look at what the savings rates have been to determine ultimately whether or not you're going to go that maybe more aggressive, more conservative, and then obviously take into consideration, how long until they retire. But diversity it is broad. It can be certainly daunting, I think, in the number of factors. So one of the things that we try to do with clients is try to simplify that, right? How do you bring down all the different aspects that you could potentially look at and attempt to try to kind of bucket the folks that you do have into something that's a bit manageable in order to make sure that you really are serving them the best way that you possibly can, as opposed to just sort of blanket offering all your employees sort of the same access, same services, and potential sort of future outcomes.
That's great, Cara. Thank you for that. One additional question that I have is, maybe this is for you mentioned multiple acronyms, ESG, D&I, and there's a big movement today in the US about that is, anti-acronyms, if I were to simplify it. And maybe for the skeptics out there, you and I understand the value firsthand because we've seen the value firsthand. We know that diverse teams are more productive. That diverse teams are more successful. Diverse teams are more likely to approach problem solving from different angles and therefore can create more value for the organization more broadly. But perhaps for the skeptics out there, would you be able to provide us with an example, maybe from one of your clients or for Mercer, more internally, about how diversity contributed firsthand to creating value to the organization more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, so absolutely, certain things have been politicized. DEI and ESG have been politicized. And I think it's typically context. It's not necessarily the obviously the thing we'd all love to hear is that corporations and everyone wants to do the right thing because it's the right thing. But I think if to address the skeptics, the important thing is it is the right thing because it's good for business, right? You want to look like your customer base. You want to be out there representing and employing people who basically have the same needs and understanding as the folks that are buying your products or using your services. So diversity plays a really important role, and you look at some organizations that have doubled down in the services industry in particular. I'm thinking of one, I just won't name it. Where when there was all the backlash on DEI, they said, actually, we will continue on our practices. We view that diversity is a key component to our success, and looking like our customers and ensuring that our employees feel represented is core to our business. And they haven't lost a penny, right? These organizations, the ones that are particularly really sticking to their guns on this one, are the ones that are showing a conviction that I think ultimately leads to again, better customer usage, better employee engagement, and better retention. And there's a massive challenge for employers these days to attract employees and to keep them. And saying and actually truly being an organization that embraces diversity and a diverse workforce is going to be the long-term winner in this case. And we do see obviously that even if we look at investments and investment management, the difference that a properly diversified investment team makes, where it's not one-star portfolio manager sort of maybe ignoring a few analysts, you really need to hear the views of the diverse team. And there is not anecdotal. There's data that proves that the investment performance is better when the team itself is diverse.
Loved hearing that perspective here, and hopefully this leaves many of our audience inspired after hearing those words from you. This was a great topic. I think maybe moving on to another topic that is picking up steam across multiple enterprises today in the United States and globally, which is like health and career initiatives. And it can have different terminologies within different enterprises. You can hear about health and well-being. You can hear about, stress management, like initiatives that are happening across enterprises today. Would love to hear about how Mercer is ensuring that health and career initiatives are effectively integrated into your overall ESG strategy.
Yeah, so it is interesting. Historically, I think HR teams have been left out of the ESG conversation. There have been DEI initiatives that maybe get done, in one area of the organization, but it hasn't really been pulled into the overall ESG strategy of an organization. And oftentimes, you don't see enough HR even being represented in those broader conversations. So, I mean, if we think about health and again use ESG as sort of our framework, the impact of health and your employees is a pretty important one on your bottom line. You need a healthy workforce that shows up every day ready to do their job. So again, let's put our skeptics hat on and say, you want to run a successful and profitable business, you need your employees to actually be showing up and to be efficient and operative. So what you need to do is make sure that they are feeling well, both physically and mentally. You want to make sure they're being looked after, and that the environments that they are operating in are good, healthy ones. You also want to make sure that if you've got employees that are working in areas that are potentially polluted or exposed to any type of weather events, that they're also covered for the exposure to that type of thing, right? So if you have employee base that is potentially exposed to, I don't know, by any chance, maybe dirtier air, they may need better coverage when it comes to things like asthma and other lung related diseases and issues that could arise. So taking sort of health into consideration as an organization as part of your ESG approach is a really important one. Career is another one, right? There's the base requirement. Of the UN SDGs is really sort of the bare minimum of living wage. But it goes way beyond that, right? You can actually incentivize an organization's leadership team to ensure that they are delivering across all aspects of ESG. I think as boards, they can actually genuinely control how well a company is paying attention to environmental and social factors by using KPIs that are handed over by sort of career consultants who work through what is the desired outcome, and then how do you incentivize to deliver on that. And then also even organizations that have decided to maybe sit up a little straighter, and they do want to start doing kind of more right by their communities and by the planet and their people. That's a pretty big transformation that needs to be undertaken. And in order to do such a thing, there are massive efforts that take place that are involving the HR teams. So I think again, career and health may not be areas that jump to front of mind when one thinks about ESG. But frankly, you can't deliver on any net zero commitments if you don't bring your people along, if you don't have the right people, and if they're not compensated appropriately. So nothing is actually going to work unless you're bringing the career aspect in. And then on the health side, again, you want to have a thriving workforce. You need to think about their health, both mentally and physically.
That's great, Cara. Thank you for that. It's very, very inspiring, very energizing. I can tell you, I'm leaving this conversation feeling more energized and inspired. So I really appreciate your kind of outside in perspective, but also your expert perspective on many of those topics. Perhaps just to wrap up, one last question for you. Many HR leaders across the world are being stretched thin right now, being asked to gather data that historically they've never gathered. It can leave them feeling demotivated, uninspired, or maybe in some cases overwhelmed. Maybe do you have any last piece of advice or any parting thoughts for some of these HR leaders today that are just getting started on this journey of ESG more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are at full capacity and overwhelmed. So start there, and I think addressing that as an organization is already a good place to start. I think as far as HR goes, I think they've played varying roles kind of over the last 40 years, and I think now you've got an opportunity to really bring HR in. If we're talking about ESG and sustainability, sustainability goals for organizations that are looking to survive and thrive, and going forward. HR is a critical component to that success, and I think that's a really important way to get your HR folks to be inspired, to be engaged, and give them a sense of purpose, because what they do is actually critical to the success of an organization when done right. If this is purely data collection exercises, check the box, that's not going to suffice. But if they actually feel brought into the overall sustainability journey, I think those organizations are the ones that are going to do better. And surely their HR people will be a lot happier as well. But obviously what we're thinking about here is sort of the overall success for organizations. And again, you don't bring your people along, you're not going to be able to deliver.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think this was a great conversation. Thank you for all the advice and the thoughts and the guiding principles and the best practices that you've shared. Hopefully it leaves many of our audience feeling inspired and motivated to drive change. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
This is the Sustainability Voices podcast. You can find all episodes of the show at esgflo.com, Spotify, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd like for you to subscribe to stay connected. I look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of Sustainability Voices. My name is Patrick Obeid. You can find me on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for listening.